Good afternoon from Chicago and the Parliament of the World's Religions. My name is Molly Horan, and I'll be co-moderating today's discussion, Learning to Stop Viral Hate, the Social Internet and the Interfaith Response. Welcome to everyone with us today, and a very warm welcome to our presenter, Christopher Wolf, a DC-based partner from the Hogan Lovells law firm and the chair of the Civil Rights Committee of the Anti-Defamation League. We are so thrilled to welcome Christopher today to our Faiths Against Hate webinar series. The Parliament has been excited for months about the upcoming and now released book he has co-authored, Viral Hate, Containing Its Spread on the Internet, and this very generous opportunity we have to discuss this monumental challenge with us. Chris's specialty in Internet and privacy law has granted him strong access and success working with Internet companies, including search engines and the social platforms most of us are using today. Interfaith activists have expressed to me from around the world to the Faiths Against Hate campaign I coordinate here at the Council for Parliament of the World's Religions that they are very frustrated by the vicious tide of hate which always seems to be worsening. That is why today I am so glad to enter a sphere we all share, the Internet, where we get to act on the interfaith movement online and most especially deal with hate in our one truly shared space. I am also honored by the participation of the Parliament's Vice Chair, Phyllis Curat, an attorney, author, and Wiccan priestess, who I know will go easy on Christopher later when she cross-examines him. Phyllis joins us to moderate the discussion, and she is joining us in New York. Before I hand the mic to Christopher, I would like to share a little bit about what the Faiths Against Hate campaign has been doing this year. It has been a very reflective week. The Parliament began this effort after the killings at the Oak Creek Gurdwara last year. I came into this effort keeping the people of that Gurdwara close to my heart in the work I do. It makes it feel less like work and more responsibility. The Parliament's goal, and mine, to use practical tools and trainings to empower faith and interfaith leaders to work on defeating hate. Our motto is to transform the elements of fear and anger into neighborly, even loving human relationships. That is not soft, that is very powerful. With that solidarity comes action. Through webinars, we've been joined by our chair, Imam Dr. Abdul Malik Mujahid, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Sikh Coalition, and now Christopher Wolf of the Anti-Defamation League. In Chicago, we are able to draw on a large community of friends to produce a full day of learning event later this fall. And we hope to meet the same energy we met this June in Long Island when we were hosted by several partnering organizations to tackle this issue. We learned about the role of bystanders before the Holocaust, the modern challenges of Islamophobia, how to best organize for interfaith action against hate, engaging the media and government, and we even studied the recent informal coalition born out of the existing interfaith network in their campaign to try and prevent a known hate speaker from a prominent engagement at a local synagogue. Surely her fan base found her on the Internet. Chris, I thank you for your participation today and trust your expertise will be transformative for us. I already noticed some hate speech crop into the Amazon reviews for your book, which reminded me to promote it like crazy before we finish today. I may be biased, but I think it's a gripping look. My questions can pause for the great showing of support we have today from attendees all over. Please share your questions during and after Chris's talk to keep the discussion flowing. We have around 25 minutes for a question and answer session, and I will welcome your questions and comments after the webinar emailed or called into the Parliament office. So why don't you take it from here, Chris?
Molly, thank you very much for that warm introduction, and thank you for all of the work you're doing on such an important topic. I thought I would start by referring to that old schoolyard adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Tell that to the Holocaust Museum guard who was murdered by a neo-Nazi whose evil, violent delusions were kept alive in his online community. And tell that to the women who live in fear of being raped because of misogynistic online threats. Tell that adage to the cyberbullied kids who stay home from school because they're so traumatized. Tell that to the family of Tyler Clementi, who is the Rutgers student, you'll recall, who committed suicide because of a tweet that ridiculed him for being gay. It's just simply the case that the old sticks and stones saying is not true in the world of websites and Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And in fact, in the online world, words and pictures, videos, and online games literally are infecting the world with a virus of hate that is a threat to people and to society. Abe Foxman, the national director of the Anti-Defamation League, and I wrote a viral hate containing its spread on the internet because hate-filled, demeaning, degrading, and potentially violence-inspiring content we think are not necessarily the byproduct of freedom of expression. We believe freedom of expression, as important as it is, does not trump human dignity. So we wrote our book because we believe people should not sit idly by when they see online attacks on people because they're different or because of their beliefs. For those who don't know, the Anti-Defamation League is a 100-year-old institution where my co-author, Abe Foxman, is the national director, and where, as Molly mentioned, I chair the National Civil Rights Committee. And the ADL mission is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to promote justice and fair treatment for all. And we spend an awful lot of time on that second part of our mission. And as part of this mission, the ADL has worked for years on an epidemic of online hate that without question is harming individuals and is harming society. Personally, drawing on my experience as one of the first lawyers who focused on internet law, and I've practiced law for 33 years, I founded the Internet Task Force of the ADL back in 1996, and I've represented the League in a variety of efforts that are focused on internet hate, including the International Network Against Cyber Hate, or ENOC, that's based in Amsterdam, that for a time I chaired, and the Interparliamentary Coalition for Combating Anti-Semitism Task Force on Internet Hate that I currently co-chair with the Speaker of Israel's Knesset, Yuli Edelstein. While certain aspects of internet hate have received national and international attention, like cyberbullying, frankly, the problem is not very high in the consciousness of the internet community, of parents, educators, and leaders. And we believe that that indifference to a growing and very harmful problem really needs to change. And we care about these issues not just because we are civil rights activists, but we have seen personally the effects of attacks, physical and verbal, on minorities. And for us, this also is personal. Abe is a Holocaust survivor and is from the place and time where propaganda was the accomplice to the death of millions. At the Fourth Global Forum on Anti-Semitism in Jerusalem at the end of May, Abe and I both explained that the virus of internet hate is spreading every day in ways that Hitler and his propaganda experts never could have imagined. Abe has been a towering figure in the fight against anti-Semitism and hate for decades, so his involvement in fighting online hate is a natural. I'm an openly gay man, happily married now, under D.C. law, but growing up, I endured the epithets and degrading comments that were widely socially acceptable. And that also colors my interest and background on this subject. So what is hate speech, and what kind of hate speech is online? Hate speech on the internet covers a range of things, and as we explain in the book, the internet has become an organizing and communications tool for extremists on the right and the left. Before the internet, those kinds of people used to meet down dark alleys, and they exchanged propaganda in plain brown envelopes. And frankly, their reach was limited. But now, they reach billions in seconds with the click of a mouse. Sociologists we quote in our book have concluded that online hate gives some people a sense that violence is not only possible for somebody to commit, but it's laudatory. Online communities of extremists and the proliferation of online hate says to them, you're not crazy, you're right. And at the other end of the spectrum, but also disturbing, are the anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, and other hate-filled rants one sees in the comment sections to mainstream news sites, often posted anonymously. For those of you who are Daily Show fans, you may have seen an episode earlier this week where John Oliver showed a YouTube video of a kitten playing with a stream of water from a kitchen faucet, a very cute cat video, which is typical on the internet. And in one of the comment sections was a obscenity-laced epithet addressed to our president. Absolutely a non sequitur, but illustrative of the kinds of hate-filled comments that appear on perfectly ordinary and innocuous content sites. During the Madoff affair, the Palm Beach Post had to close the comment section because the anti-Semitic comments about Jews and money were rampant. For most of us, that hate speech is the equivalent of online pollution, but its common and ubiquitous appearance gives some the impression that those opinions expressed must be mainstream. We are especially worried about the impact of hate on vulnerable children. From what we call cloaked websites, such as this one that you see, that purports to provide historical information on Dr. Martin Luther King, but that in fact contains racist lies, to online games that celebrate attacks on minorities, and of course including cyberbullying, kids are at significant risk because of online hate. And vulnerable children often believe what they read and are misled, or worse, carefully taught to hate, in the words of that famous South Pacific song. Also is disturbing is that many people react to the common appearance of hate by treating it as the norm. So in our book, Abe and I do not just show how bad things are on the internet, and they're pretty bad, but we explain how each of us can do something to stand up against internet hate, and our action plan is in the book. Now, this might surprise you coming from a lawyer who's practiced for more than 3 decades, but what we don't advocate is the use of law to regulate speech, and that's not just because the First Amendment here in the United States puts strict limits on the regulation of speech, but even where those laws are available to control speech, they are largely ineffective and often counterproductive. We well understand how in places like Germany it is literally unspeakable to deny the Holocaust that resulted in the murder of millions, and the important statement that Holocaust denial laws play. But as a tool to make a difference in the appearance of hate speech, those laws make little difference. Consider these statistics. There are 40,000 new posts to Facebook every minute. There are 300,000 tweets on Twitter every minute. And there are 60 to 70 hours of YouTube video posted every minute. And so it is not possible for the law to deal with the scale of internet hate. It's a little bit like cockroaches on the kitchen. You might be able to target and take out one on the kitchen counter, just as the law might be able to take out one incident of hate speech online. But there are many more behind the wall that will be unaffected by that isolated targeting. The British police recently stepped up arresting individuals who made anti-Muslim statements under the UK's so-called malicious communications law. And while we certainly are against anti-Muslim statements, all that effort did was address a handful of comments, and it may have in fact chilled legitimate dissent while driving the haters to other outlets where they'll be less identifiable. And while the UK's use of the law may only episodically be objectionable, there are repressive regimes like China and Iran that really take comfort and justification from the use of law in democracies to regulate online speech. So if the law is not available, what can be done? Now, as I said, some people simply shrug off online hate as the inevitable effluent of internet freedom, and they rationalize it as a problem that's just too big to address. And that problem of scale, the sheer volume of internet content that I mentioned, frankly, is no excuse for not trying to deal with it online. You know, when viruses cause disease, society responds even when the scale of the problem is daunting. And likewise, we think the virus of hate requires a broad response. Counter-speech, which is what Justice Brandeis called the disinfectant of sunlight, is a really powerful tool. You may recall last May a coalition of women's advocates mounted a campaign against Facebook and advertisers on Facebook to protest the appearance of dreadful misogynistic content, pictures of beaten and bound women, calls for raping women, degrading slogans against women, masquerading in humor, and other grossly offensive content. And that campaign prompted Facebook immediately to admit that it needed to do more under its terms of service prohibiting hate speech, that it needed to do more to police the anti-women and violence-inspiring content, and it committed to do more. And the women bringing the issue to Facebook's and the world's attention were not willing simply to accept online misogyny as the norm. And when an event was established on Facebook called Kill a Jew Day, even before Facebook took it down, there was a counter group called 1 Million Strong against Kill a Jew Day that was up. And look at the people who speak up on Twitter by retweeting some of the commentary. More recently, there was you may have read about a group of Christian activists from a Wisconsin-based ministry that began to lobby Facebook to remove the community page that was called Virgin Mary Should Have Aborted, stating that it violates the website's policy against hate speech. And the page has dedicated its content to feature what they believe is the obsolescence of organized religion. That was the purpose of the page. And it was intended to be satirical. And some of the users, though, obviously are not finding the site as satirical and finding it to be hate speech. They think that it is illustrative of the anti-religious material that appears online regularly, and there were online petitions demanding that Facebook shut the page down, which have yielded about 20,000 signatures. And one of the petitions is featured on a Facebook page entitled Catholics and Protestants Against Facebook Discrimination. And it remains to be seen whether or not that petition will be granted. It's interesting to note that the definition of hate speech on Facebook, hate speech that is prohibited by its terms of service, is content, I'll quote it, that attacks people based on their actual or perceived race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, disability, or disease. And I think the key phrase there is that it attacks people rather than ideas or the concepts themselves. And in the discussion period, we can talk about whether that is the appropriate definition. I think the important thing to note from this episode is that the tool of counter-speech was used. The 2 online petitions were put on the very same Facebook platform that the offending content, the Virgin Mary page, was posted. And there were 20,000 participants there. So we think that counter-speech is an incredibly important tool, and one that can be used because the tools of the Internet are available. But at a minimum, we think that the host of online content, the web host and social media companies like Facebook, should have clear terms of service prohibiting hate speech, and they should have the staff and procedures in place to enforce those terms of service when complaints about online hate are brought to their attention. There needs to be care taken to allow free expression, but when content crosses the line, it really should come down. And it's not a First Amendment issue. The government is involved here, and is not involved here, rather. That's what the First Amendment controls. The hosts, the Facebooks of the world, have their own First Amendment right to publish what they choose, and if they want a more civil corner of the Internet, that, of course, is their choice. Now, I should say a word, or more than a word, several words in defense of Facebook, because they take these issues very seriously. They've engaged in dialogue, and I hope they're engaging in dialogue with the groups that posted the petitions, as they have with other groups. We at the ADL have been engaged with them quite a lot. They have a large staff that deals with this. They want to get their policy right. They want to have terms of service and enforcement of those terms that are effective. At the same time, they want to promote free speech and the ability to engage in counter-speech. And likewise, Google and others also have mechanisms. I'll note that Twitter just today announced that globally it was going to allow, or rather provide mechanisms for people to report offensive speech. Twitter really has no terms of use in terms of what speech is in or out of bounds. But recently there have been some tweets against women, especially in the UK, that have resulted in Twitter changing its policies. But we think it's important for the online hosts, the intermediaries, to learn why some content it is hosting, like Holocaust denial in the view of the ADL, is hate speech. They ought to engage in discussions with people like the Catholics and Protestants against Facebook discrimination, and they need to put adequate resources in place to respond to complaints about the presence of hate-filled posts and to take those posts down promptly. We think that these intermediaries can promote and publish counter speech even more than they do now. And we also think they can help with cyber literacy and anti-hate education. Without question, more is needed not only from these online companies, but parents and educators to teach kids about cyber literacy and online civility. Frankly, we do a woefully bad job of that kind of education in this country. And as demonstrated by the women who push Facebook to change, people who use the internet need to speak up when they see online hate. The phrase, when you see something, say something, should not be restricted to unattended parcels in airports. So we think, Abe Foxman and I, as authors of the book, and the ADL thinks that each of us has a duty to speak out against online hate, and that counter speech and the spotlight of the truth to counter the lies of hate speech will be enormously effective. This statue is a statue of Edmund Burke, and his warning from the pre-internet era really still applies, that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, good men and women, I should say. And it is time for people to take the issue of hate speech more seriously, and for organizations like yours and ours to work together and to work very hard to address this issue, because it is not a condition that we need to accept, and it's a condition that ultimately can be very dangerous. So why don't I stop there with my direct presentation and take any questions or comments you may have, and I look forward to having a discussion with you.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I was just cheating on the webinar to post onto Facebook the news you just gave us about Twitter.
Okay.
So I want to mention again that I'm midway through the book. So some of my questions might be answered further on, but just to open the discussion, I'm going to welcome Phyllis. Are you there?
I am. I'm looking forward to this. That was a wonderful presentation.
Right.
Well, thank you very much.
So, Phyllis, I'm just going to start with a question, and maybe you can tag team and follow up with a question, and then I'll open it up to the attendees. Thank you guys for being there. One question I want to ask before we delve into discussing the book is that how interfaith organizations could work more closely with the Anti-Defamation League in some way and some of the other larger organizations dealing with this, and what value would you see in there being some form of an interfaith proclamation on what we feel is hate speech, perhaps similar to the informal thing you mentioned about 1 million strong on Facebook against hate speech, and what impact might that have in terms of getting the attention of the stakeholders and the internet companies with which you are working and advocating?
So the answer to your first part of your question, I think, will inform the answer to the second part of the question. I think there needs to be a larger discussion of to what degree do we generally want these online services to be playing censor of speech. I recently spoke with Professor Jeff Rosen, who is at George Washington University Law School and who runs the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And he's very concerned that these online services like Google and Facebook, that from which so many of us get so much of our information, have enormous, largely unchecked power. Individuals sit in rooms and make decisions about content, and it's not really subject to judicial review. It's not subject to legislation. In fact, as some of you who are lawyers may know, there's a federal law, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which immunizes these services both for the content that people post as well as for their editorial decisions on what to allow and what not to allow. So there is an enormous amount of power that these companies have, and I think we would all agree that we don't want them to do anything that would interfere with our personal or collective, through our organization's ability to engage in discussion and debate on important issues. We don't want the definition of hate speech to be so broad that legitimate disagreement would be filtered out. And so that's kind of our starting point here, that we need to be careful when we ask for a broader definition of hate speech. But at the same time, we need to look at the definitions that exist and see whether or not some of the content that we find objectionable really does fit within it, or whether the other tools, frankly, are better ways to address it. And so, for example, the example that I gave with respect to the Virgin Mary page, which is obviously terribly objectionable, but I wonder, just looking at the Facebook definition of hate speech, whether it rises to that level, whether individuals are being targeted or whether religions are being targeted. And this is a discussion that we can have, and discussion we ought to have together with the ADL, about whether criticisms of religion should be banned or whether they should be used as a catalyst for a reasonable discussion and for an impassioned defense of those religions. So that's, that's something on which we may agree or disagree, but I think that's the kind of discussion that we need to have. And then after that, I think we can have a further discussion with the online platforms. And I think most of them are ready to have it and are participating in various fora to do it, both private meetings as well as public meetings, to talk about how they exercise their discretion and their censorship power. In the book we have a chapter about the Innocence of the Muslims video, which the Obama administration asked YouTube to take down, and which it blocked in some of the Middle Eastern countries where violence erupted. And it may surprise you to hear that Abe Foxman and I concluded in the book that YouTube was right, that Google was right to allow it to stay up because it didn't violate their definition of hate speech. And frankly, the protests that erupted after the showing of this video, which had been online for months but only became notorious when someone reposted it in a hateful way, that protest really could have turned into what is known as the heckler's veto. Something disturbs people so much that they cause a ruckus and then cause people to take down the content. We think a better way of addressing it, which is what ultimately happened, is for people to watch the video to see how ridiculous it was and how stupid it was and how false it was, and to address it on its own terms so that it becomes marginalized and not some sort of censored speech that becomes the forbidden fruit that people want to have. So again, we may disagree on that point, but it's an important one to define hate speech in such a way that it really addresses the speech that causes people real harm and injury versus the speech that provokes an important debate and discussion.
Wow, very, very comprehensive response. And again, I don't want to sound shameful here, but I plugged your book again because I'm getting educated very, very well. And it's a very quick and easy read. But I will welcome more questions. Phyllis Curat, Madam, do you have something particular you would like to pose to Chris?
Well, a lot of questions. I'm curious what you and your co-author think of the laws that we see in Europe. You were referring earlier, for example, in Germany, where it's illegal to deny the Holocaust. Different cultural context. But if you could address that, that would be very helpful, because a lot of our audience today is from the UK or from Europe. So we have a very strong interest in this particular angle.
Sure. So I guess there are two parts to my answer. The first part is as an American who is steeped, and an American lawyer steeped in the First Amendment. There used to be an ad for the Washington Post, which Jeff Bezos just bought, and the ad said, if you don't get it, you don't get it. And the same thing can be said about the First Amendment. I think those of us in the United States who were brought up with the First Amendment understand that even vile and repugnant speech is kind of part of our society, and in the right place and time has a role to play, because we can always respond to it, or should be able to respond to it. Now, we should also be able to shield our children, and we don't allow people to shout fire in a crowded room, and we don't also allow speech that defames people or violates their intellectual property. There obviously are limits, but we think that the marketplace of ideas, again to borrow from Justice Brandeis, is the way to deal with ideas and thoughts that we don't like or think are harmful. I think the online world is slightly different because of the viral, pernicious effect that speech that might even be permissible under the First Amendment might have. But then when you get to the point of enacting laws and enforcing laws against speech in countries that don't have the First Amendment, like the UK, like Germany, and like France, it does have the potential to chill legitimate dissent and to squash, ideas that may be unpopular, but nevertheless perhaps deserving of dissection. Part two of my answer, though, is that these laws just are not effective in dealing with hate speech, given the scale that I mentioned, and in fact may make martyrs out of the people who are prosecuted. When David Irving was prosecuted for Holocaust denial in the UK and in Germany, I guess, his followers then just reposted his content in the United States where it was legal. And it drew more attention to him than, frankly, had he not been prosecuted, perhaps. He drew a lot of attention to himself by suing Deborah Lipstadt for calling him a Holocaust denier. But it's the phenomenon of bringing more attention, more celebrity to the wrongdoer by putting them on a national stage, which is why they may say or do the things that they do. I had a conversation with the government official in Germany charged with enforcing their Holocaust denial laws, and I think she essentially agreed with me that it is more symbolic than actually effective, and her concern was over the trivialization of the Holocaust, everything being called a Holocaust, everyone being called a Nazi, so that kids just don't get the sense of what an incredibly odious period in our history that was if it's overused and trivialized in that way. None of that is illegal, by the way, but Holocaust denial is, and Holocaust denial is pretty easy to refute with the facts.
So Chris, I want to ask specifically, I'm going to be turning to Rob Sellers here in a minute, who's a trustee at the Parliament, and beyond that, moving on. But I want to speak to your point particularly about responding to hate speech. I think for some of us who could probably develop a very thoughtful, very lengthy reply, especially on social platforms, when we encounter it, we often don't, because maybe we tried once before and it just engages and invites and solicits more hate, and it's ineffective, or perhaps there's some element of fear, and it's hard to judge who is just a cowardly sort of anonymous person, whether or not they're using their own name is up for debate, or they're actually a perpetrator of violence, or someone who will incite violence or threaten, especially here, us at the Parliament, and many of the faith-based and interfaith-based groups we work with. What can you offer on that? Maybe not from the book, but personally, having worked in legality here.
Well, you're right. You can absolutely go right down a rat hole if you engage in the comment sections with people, and you've seen it, the back and forth, and it devolves into this just spiral of nastiness and ridiculousness. And you're not going to convince anybody, and frankly, the stuff probably won't get read. And so I think a combination of the intermediaries facilitating hate speech in a meaningful way is the way to go here. The New York Times last year, maybe a year and a half ago, changed its comment policy to provide that people who register and use their real names get their comments posted first. And people who want to use the veil of anonymity, and there's a legitimate place for anonymity in certain circumstances, dating all the way back to the anonymous pamphleteers before the revolution. But people who want to be anonymous, who typically engage in more hate speech and more off-topic nonsense, go to the bottom of the queue. And so at the top of the queue are the more legitimate points being made, and that's the place where you and I can make our points in having a discussion. But there also need to be places where information can be displayed more prominently. I'll give you an example of what we negotiated with Google that turned out to be terribly effective. If you put the word Jew in the search engine, search box on Google search, for a period of time, one of the very first search results was an organization called Jew Watch, or a website called Jew Watch, which was a virulently anti-Semitic site. And the ADL went to Google and said, we're concerned about this being the site that comes up first or in the top bunch of results. Think about kids who might be doing research. It's terribly misleading and offensive. And we'd like you to change where it appears. And Google said, no, we don't do that. And they don't. But what they did do was provide a free sponsored link, one of those ads off to the right or to the left, that said, the first search result that you see, or the search result you see for Jew Watch, contains offensive hate speech. To learn more about hate speech and anti-Semitism, click here, and there was a link to the Anti-Defamation League site on hate speech and anti-Semitism. So that was an intermediary-provided counter-speech vehicle that turned out to be quite effective. And we like to see more experiments like that, and we're encouraging the platforms to provide opportunities like that to respond to some of the content. You know, the time, place, and manner of speech makes a big difference. So giving you the chance to write a letter to the editor is very different from giving you the chance to have your viewpoint put side by side with the points that you want to respond to.
Oh, thank you for that. I am very intrigued about what Google has done with that particular search term. I heard about it from one of the top people at Google who was here in Chicago, and he also explained that similarly they do the same thing for people searching for methods to learn how to commit self-harm or end their own life. That they promote resources to get help, which I think is very effective. The only judgment I will give to what they're doing with the Jew Watch ad response, the counter speech, is that because it's in the ad section, it's often out of sight, out of mind for people searching. I wish that they would display it more prominently.
Yeah, although, you know, it's a start, and Google makes most of its billions from those ads, so somebody's reading them.
Right, right. So I'm going to ask Rob Sellers. I've unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Molly.
Welcome. Welcome.
Thanks very much. Chris, I've appreciated your presentation.
Thank you.
Especially the helpful information about counter speech and working through intermediaries. But it seems to me that much of your presentation has addressed those who directly post hate speech. And I'm wondering what you think about persons that we know who are our friends or our acquaintances who maybe unknowingly or unthinkingly pass along hate speech through forwarded emails. And in this case, we might not be responding to strangers who post hate speech, but to friends and acquaintances. And I wonder if you have any advice for how to maneuver rather touchy approach to countering hate speech?
Well, you know, in the workplace, it's kind of easy because depending on the nature of the hate speech, it is likely to violate one of the various anti-discrimination laws. And either a coworker or a supervisor can say, you know, you really can't be using the company's network or the government's network to send that information around because it could create a hostile environment and violate the anti-discrimination laws. But if you're talking about a friend on Gmail or some other commercial email account sending you something, there is something about the isolation of the internet, of email, of technology that encourages people to say and do things they would never do face-to-face. I think we've gotten away from the situation in society where people tell racist or homophobic or misogynistic or religiously offensive jokes at dinner parties or in social gatherings. It's just not cool, right? But they still continue to do it in emails, or might tend to, or might forward that offensive joke. But the same kind of distance and isolation could allow you to say right back to them, you know, I like hearing from you, but not with that content. And that really, you really need to consider the effect that kind of stuff has on people. And it takes a certain amount of bravery to stand up to people, whether they're your friends or coworkers, to say things like that. But that's really my point about when you see something, say something. We shouldn't just slough off these kinds of comments. You know, when I was growing up, I heard a lot of comments, a lot of homophobic comments that I just ignored, but they really had an effect on me psychologically. They have to when you hear, you know, people denigrating you for who you are, or something that was anti-Semitic. And there's someone who said that being gay is like being Jewish twice, and that may be right. And so people need to understand that words do hurt. Sticks and stones just isn't true, and that's true online as well as offline.
I have a quick question. In addition to this book, which seems like a tremendous resource, and of course the opportunities that will come to you to engage the public in various means like webinars to talk about this, what are some of the campaign? Are there any campaigns that you can point to where the internet is being used? I mean, you gave us the example of the women who rallied with regard to the misogynistic content of Facebook. What are there efforts ongoing right now online to organize and raise consciousness about civility and the virus of hate speech?
So not a whole lot, and frankly, you know, we hope to see more. The ADL has a campaign that it's been in at the workplace and at schools called No Place for Hate. And, you know, my dream is one day we have a No Place for Hate online campaign where that banner goes up and where you can click on it and learn more information about hate speech and how to fight it and how to educate kids. And absolutely, I'm working on that in my spare time. And we welcome allies for that. But the other thing that you can do, and it doesn't take a big public campaign, and frankly, I have a view that rather than organizing a boycott or getting the press involved, I hope that organizations will go to the Facebooks and Googles of the world first. They have senior executives who are charged with dealing with these issues. They will return your phone call. They will respond to your email. It may not be quite as quick as you like, but they will do it. And they will engage and have a discussion. And you know, we encourage people to contact them and to do that. And we encourage intermediaries to, if the number of phone calls and contacts get to be so large, and they might, to hire more people and to hire more skilled people and to have rules and procedures that are scalable so that they can train people in India as well as in Indiana.
How about Wikipedia? Have you, what have you found there with regard to the content and hate, their definitions of hate speech and
So we haven't engaged that much with Wikipedia. Usually individuals who object to their own biographies get a pretty good response. They have a fairly good peer review process, so that if there is, for example, a description of a religion that is skewed or is intentionally skewed to be hate speech, intended to be hateful, I think they've been pretty responsive of that. You all may know better about that than I on that particular issue. But the involvement of the online community in editing Wikipedia content has proven to be pretty effective.
So, Chris, I'm going to open up for more discussion with our participants. Lucy Sanchez, are you with us? Lucy? Oh, Lucy had a question. We'll come back to her. So beware, if you have raised your hand, I might be calling on you. Jason Tippett? Jason Tippett, are you with us? Okay, and
I'm wondering whether the participants' phones may be muted.
well, I am unmuting you when I call
You're
your
muting
name.
them? Okay.
Right. So now I'm going to go to Eileen Epperson, who I wholeheartedly trust has a question prepared. Eileen Epperson?
Yes, here I am.
Oh, thank goodness. What questions do you have for Chris?
Well, what I wrote in the little question place there was I'm very active in promoting the Charter for Compassion in my community in Northwest Connecticut, and I'm very interested in the ways that interfaith groups, because we're starting with the interfaith community here to really start that conversation, that community-wide conversation. I'm interested in what Chris, you could say about interfaith groups being prepared to respond to hate crimes or hate speech or whatever, maybe mobilizing in advance of a need to respond. Can you speak to? I'm looking. I can hear you. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi. So that's my question is, how can we mobilize the interfaith groups around the country to be prepared to respond to viral hate online?
No, it's a great question, and the two large components for individuals and groups are the counter-speech tool and education tool. I hope that in the next generation there's a greater sensitivity to the impact and effect that hate speech has on people and on society, and frankly as a pollutant online, and that there is a process in schools for teaching kids online civility as they get taught cyber literacy. I think we do a terrible job of both, by the way. We simply give kids the technological tools. And there was a time when parents thought that kids were smarter about technology than they were, so they were basically hands-off, which was an abdication of their responsibility. They wouldn't send their kids out into a bad neighborhood without guidance, and they shouldn't send them online without guidance. So I think a large part of it ought to be educating kids about the impact of what they say and do online on others, but importantly on themselves. You see a lot of kids who injure their ability to get into schools and get jobs because of things they say and do online.
Yes.
So maybe self-interest will be a way to motivate them. So education is a huge part of this. And in the anti-cyberbullying world, we've done a much better job, but hate speech goes beyond cyberbullying. And then the counter-speech part of it, I think that in addition to engaging with the intermediaries, which really is done typically by organizations to the Facebooks of the world, using the tools that are available to flag hate speech, even if it's a simple report abuse button, has an effect, and those actually do get recorded. Now, I think 95% of the reports are made when people disagree with what's said rather than when they really are reporting hate speech, and that's, I guess, to be expected. But I'm hoping that the intermediaries will provide greater tools to provide responses, that we come up with new technological means to have the online equivalent of letters to the editor or instant responses, not in the way that the comment sections appear, which, as I said, devolve into just rants of nastiness, but in really considered discussions. I don't know whether you've seen the Sunday Dialogue feature of the New York Times.
No.
But they have somebody write a letter, and then they have 3 or 4 people respond to that letter, and then the original author responds to their points.
Okay.
And that's a rather civilized way of doing things.
Okay. Well, I can see that interfaith groups, there may not be a way for them necessarily right now to respond as a group online. That sounds like it's more of an individual response.
Yes.
But they can write letters to papers, and sign as a group.
Absolutely. And frankly, having the discussion about to what extent do we want online censorship? We know the government can't do it under the First Amendment. How much do we want the online intermediaries to use their scalpel to remove speech versus how much do we want to rely on the tools of counter-speech and education? I think that's a discussion that needs to be had by interfaith groups and frankly others. It's a tough one. It's a hard discussion. But I'm of the view that it can't, that the rules on the online services, because of their power and their breadth and the ability of everybody to be a publisher, can't be as broad as the First Amendment, but also shouldn't be so narrow as to chill legitimate speech and legitimate discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm going to engage, if I can, Jonathan Gerard. If I'm unable to connect with him through audio, I would be happy to read his question. He seems like he has a great idea. Yeah. Jonathan, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You sound like you are in a tin can, but continue.
Well, I'm in a Wendy's hamburger tin can here, off of Route 95 near Washington, D.C.
So, Jonathan, I see here that you have an idea to suggest, and you'd like to see what Chris has to say about it, so why don't you tell us?
Sure. When I lived in Exeter, the Ku Klux Klan used to come every once in a while and demonstrate, and we didn't want to have a counter-demonstration for fear that we would just increase the publicity they got and just feed into their own goals. So what I proposed, and we actually did, was to have the religious communities in Exeter, New Hampshire, create a pool of money and just announce to the Ku Klux Klan that if they were to demonstrate, for every member of the Klan who came, we were going to donate, say, $10 to the NAACP or ADL or whatever. And that idea is behind my suggestion that the millions of people who use the internet, if they each donated $1, we would have a huge pool of money to create a systemic response to hate speech, so that the more hate speech there was, the more donations there would be to these groups that they hate, and that systemic response might actually be effective in cutting down on the hate speech.
Well, I love that idea. I think that's terrific. Now let's figure out how to make it happen. Maybe we can get some of the online services to contribute a button that people can click to donate that $1. I think that's terrific.
I find it hilarious and wonderful, and I support it 1,000%. I'm gonna.
Is that a pledge of $1,000, Molly?
Well, I work for a nonprofit, so it's a pledge of raising $1,000. So I'm going to address another question here that we sort of touched on in terms of the martyr effect that you spoke of, and the question of media that you brought up. So we're seeing so much attention to the cyberbullying issue in relation to the internet. That seems to have the eyes and ears of the media. But if you could just give one piece of advice on what a message should be directed to the media relating to our interest in solving this issue, what would that be?
You know, I think it's very simple that words of hate really do hurt and cause harm. And the story that Abe Foxman tells, and it's kind of self-obvious, but nevertheless it needs to be said, is that the Holocaust did not start with the ovens. It started with words. It started with propaganda. It started with lies and distortions about people and their beliefs and their religion. And that message needs to be conveyed, that what you say really does matter and can cause enormous harm. Almost think before you speak. Right.
Well, question, if you might be willing to, and if you don't know the answer to this, no worries, what is the policy of the ADL on their social platforms in dealing with hateful comments and posters?
So we've just started to do blogs where people can actually post comments. That's a relatively new phenomenon. And we're trying to self-monitor, which is a huge job to have to look at every posting. I'm not sure how long that's going to last, and we may retreat to a position where we just don't allow comments. I should tell you, at my law firm, I have a couple of blogs on substantive issues. We just don't allow comments because we think it's too dangerous in terms of what people might say or do, and that's too bad. We engage in other places, and that might be the answer, is to have not every blog needs to have a comment section.
And what of Facebook?
You know, the best thing that Facebook has going for it is its real name policy, because it is simply true that people tend not to say things that are outrageous when they can be attributable to them personally. Mm-hmm. And they've now allowed for something known as pages, and that's where that Virgin Mary thing appeared, was on a page with anonymous administrators, Facebook users whose names are known to Facebook, but who can post the pages anonymously. So to Facebook's great credit, one of the things it's done recently is when there is content on those pages that may not violate its hate speech policy, and frankly the Virgin Mary one might rise to this level, that they will go to the administrators and say, look, we're going to take this down unless you're willing to be identified personally with it. We want to put your name in the administrator's page so people know that this is a page that you're producing. And I forget what the actual number is, but it's something like 95% of those come down because people don't want to be identified with hateful stuff.
Wow.
And that's one of the strongest tools that Facebook has going for it, is the real name identification.
Right.
Elsewhere on the Internet, in most places on the Internet, on Twitter, for example, you don't have to use your real name. And so you don't have that kind of control.
Well, that very much addressed the question, so I thank you. And I do see we have a few other questions. Many of them are very similar in tone, so I'm going to take them to the Parliament Facebook page so that we can open the discussion to several more people who were not able to participate. But I just want to thank you again, Christopher. I want to thank everyone who brought questions to the table, and Phyllis for your time. To close, I'm going to, again, invite you to come join our Facebook community. We've been growing exponentially the last couple of weeks. It's just facebook.com/Parliament of Religions. Our newsletter goes out every 2 weeks. That can be subscribed to through our website. And something that I would like to announce generously, Chris has offered to sign and send 2 copies of Viral Hate to the Parliament to be given as a gift for donors to our Face Against Hate campaign. Thank you for that. I will tell you that for those who would like to donate at the level of $100 to sponsor our Face Against Hate work, we can communicate on that opportunity. We're also promoting the purchase of the book through Amazon, where you can, again, see the hate speech for yourself and know that the proceeds there will benefit 100% to the ADL's work against hate. I will have 2 very exciting webinars to announce for the month of September soon through our social channels. And again, I just want to say, again, thank you so much to everyone who participated today. And I commit to working with you to continue to address this problem, and I look forward to this being the beginning of an ongoing discussion. So thank you again, Chris. I'm going to meet everyone who can on Facebook, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, Molly, very much. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.